Chapter 24. The three of them travelled back on the same boat as Maya and Minty had come out on, the Cardinal with her blue funnel and snow-white hull. Maya had thought that having Finn with them would make it easier. At least they could all be miserable together. But it didn't. Finn had disappeared into himself. He was very quiet and stood hunched up over the rail, looking out at the grey sea. The cold surprised him. He would shiver suddenly in the wind. He had decided that Westwood was to be his fate. "It's what you said in the museum," he told Miss Minton. "Come out, Finn Taverner, and be a man. I thought I could run away forever, but if Clovis is in trouble, I've got to help him." It was his time with his auntie which had changed him. They thought that everyone's life was like a river. You had to flow with the current and not struggle, which wasted breath and made you more likely to drown. And the river of life seemed to be carrying him back to Westwood. He had left his dog behind with Furo because of the quarantine. Rob would never endure 6 months shut up in kennels. And as soon as they knew Maya was safe, the Carter's servants, with old Leela, had returned, offering to work unpaid. And Miss Minton had set them to repaint the spinach boat, which she had christened River Queen. As for Maya, she was to go back to school. She will be safe there for a few years till she is ready to go out into the world, Mr. Murray had written to Miss Minton. So now Maya was collecting her memories. "We mustn't only remember the good bits," she said. "We must remember the bad bits too, so that we know it was real." But there weren't really any bad bits once she had escaped from the twins. The fried termites which his auntie had cooked for them hadn't tasted very nice. And there had been a tame bush turkey which woke them up at an unearthly hour with its screeching. "But it was all part of it," said Maya. "It belonged." Miss Minchin knew she was going to be dismissed, and she thought this was perfectly fair. A governess who let her charges sail up the rivers of the Amazon and live with Indian tribes could hardly expect to keep her job. She missed the professor. "Would you like to marry me?" he had asked her politely before they sailed, and she had thanked him and said she did not think she would be very good at being married. When the boat docked at Liverpool, they went their different ways. Finn was determined to go to Westwood, quite alone. He had never bought a train ticket nor looked in a timetable, but he seemed to know what to do, and he would let no one help him. "I wish he didn't look as though he was going to have his head cut off," said Maya. The moment when the children said goodbye passed quickly. Finn was taking the train to York. Maya and Minty were bound for London. The bustle of getting their luggage on and finding their seats muffled everything. Only when the train steamed out did Maya realise that she might not see Finn again, and heard the snap of Miss Minton's handbag as she had heard it on the day when they left England, and was again handed Minty's large white handkerchief to wipe her eyes. The school, as they drove up to it, was just the same. The brass plate saying the Mayfair Academy for Young Ladies, the rows of desks she could see through the window. In classroom B, Miss Carlyle was probably still teaching the source of the River Thames. "I'll see you tomorrow," said Miss Minton, and drove quickly away. Mr. Murray was coming to interview her at the school on the following afternoon. Everyone was so welcoming and friendly, and somehow that made it worse. The girls clustered around Maya. Melanie had painted a picture of her with a boa constrictor around her neck, and they'd made a banner saying, "Welcome back." Some of them had read about the police boat sent to find her and thought she was a heroine. What was it like being rescued, they wanted to know. "It was like being rescued from paradise," said Maya. But no one believed her. They listened while she tried to describe the journey in the Arabella and life with the Zanti, but they couldn't take it in. "Aren't you glad to be back?" they kept asking her. It must have been so scary. And they told her that she had been given her old bed back and that there was a new history teacher who dyed her hair. So Maya gave up. She realised that adventures, once they were over, were things that had to stay inside one, that no one else could quite understand. The headmistress, Miss Banks, and her sister Emily understood a little better. They were happy to take Maya back, but they thought it might not be easy for her to settle down again. You must give yourself time, they said kindly, and Maya patted the spaniel and remembered the howls of Finn's dog as he was left behind with Fiora. But in the evening, when at last she had a moment alone, she slipped into the library and leant her head against the mahogany steps she had climbed the day she knew she was going to the Amazon. The dream she had dreamt there had been a true one. She had found a land whose riches she had never imagined before, and she had found Finn. One night was over. In 10 minutes the bell would ring for them to go to the dormitories, then another bell for them to kneel and pray. And why not? How else was one supposed to run a school? "Oh, Finn," said Maya, "how am I going to bear it, day after day after day?" When he reached York, Finn changed onto a very small train which stopped, after a while, at Westwood Hall. Clovis had said he would meet him there, but there was no sign of him. Finn left his bag in the ticket office and began to walk. It was a cold, dank afternoon, and however fast he walked, he could not get warm. The light was already going, or perhaps on this bleak day it had never really come. He saw the high pile of his ancestral home from a long way off. It looked unspeakably dismal, with its useless turrets and jagged battlements. He tried to imagine living there, year in and year out, and had to clench his teeth so as not to panic. The gate, when he reached it, was closed and surmounted by jagged spikes. As he stood there, the lodge-keeper came out. "This is private property," he said. "No loitering. You'd best be getting along." Finn glared at him. The rudeness and snobbishness was just what he had expected from this awful place. But before he could tell the man what he thought of him, he saw Clovis hurrying down the drive. He wore a tweed suit and cap, but round his neck was a large white bandage. "Oh, gosh," thought Finn. "Have they tried to cut his throat?" Clovis came up to the gates, and the lodge-keeper touched his cap in a humble manner and said, "Are you going out, sir?" "Yes, Jarvis," said Clovis. "I'm going into the village." As he came through the gate, Finn saw that the white thing round his neck was not a bandage, but a scarf, rather a bumpy one knitted in white wool. "I thought they'd cut your throat." Clovis shook his head. The scarf was a present from the middle banshee who had taken up knitting. "There's a tea place just down the road. No one goes there much on a weekday. We can be alone." The tea shop was a tiny room in the front parlour of a brick cottage. The lady who ran it greeted Clovis as respectfully as the lodge-keeper had done, and asked after Sir Aubrey. "You'd better tell me exactly what's happened," said Finn, after they'd given their order. "You said you were in a mess. Well, I'll help you out, but I must know. Obviously you haven't told him who you really are. You haven't confessed." "But I have," said Clovis. "I have, and it was absolutely awful." So then he told Finn what had happened when at last he found Sir Aubrey alone and willing to listen to him. "I told him I wasn't Finn Taverner, and it was all a mistake. I was going to explain everything properly, but as soon as I said I wasn't really his grandson, he went a ghastly sort of blue colour and started clutching his chest, and then he crumpled up and fell on the floor. I know his heart isn't good, but I didn't imagine." Clovis shook his head, remembering the horror of that moment. "I was sure he was going to die and that had killed him. The servants came and carried him off the bed, and the doctor said he'd had some sort of a shock and I wasn't allowed to see him." Clovis picked up a cut glass ashtray and started fiddling with it. "When they did let me in," he went on, "he tried to sit up in bed, and then he said, 'You were only joking, boy, weren't you? Tell me it was a joke, and you're really my grandson. Boys like to play jokes, I know.'" "And?" Finn's voice was sharp. "What did you say?" "I said, yes, of course it was a joke. Of course I was Bernard's son and his grandson. I know I shouldn't have done, but if you'd seen his face." And then he began to get better very quickly. "But he wants to make everything legal because I don't have a birth certificate or anything. He wants to name me officially as heir to Westwood and give me an allowance, quite a big one. And I don't know what to do. He's absolutely certain I'm his grandson. There's a painting of some admiral who's supposed to have my nose. Finn was leaning across the table, staring at him intently. And you don't want it? You don't want Westwood or the money or anything? That's why you asked me to come? The lady brought their muffins and the teapot in a knitted cosy. When they were alone again, Clovis said, "It isn't that I don't want it. The old man's been very kind to me, and well, there are things that I could do. I'd like to bring my foster mother here to cook. She's always wanted to work in a house like this. And the cook we've got is leaving, and your cousins are nice. They're Basher's girls. You wouldn't think she'd have nice children, but she has. But I couldn't take it from you for the rest of your life, for always. How could I live in a great house and take the money that's really yours, when you live in a wooden hut? I mean, now that you've seen it, surely." He broke off. Finn was looking very odd, different. He reached for Clovis's hand. "Clovis, do you swear that you don't mind staying here as master of Westwood? Do you absolutely swear it?" "I swear it." Finn, as he walked back with his friend to the station, seemed to be made of something quite different. Not muscle and bone, feathers and air and lightness. He did not actually intend to fly because that would have been showing off, but he could have done so if he wanted to. "You'll never know what you've done for me," he said as they reached the gates of the level crossing. "If there's anything you want." Clovis grinned. "Can I have Maya when she's grown up?" Finn's smile vanished in an instant. "No," he said. "Oh well, Maya would probably want to go off adventuring again one day," thought Clovis, and that would suit him. He'd settle for one of the Basher's banshees. There was plenty of time to decide which one. At 2:00, Maya saw Mr. Murray's motor stop outside the school. 5 minutes later, Miss Minton arrived walking across the square. The interview took place in Miss Banks's private sitting room while Maya waited in the hall, and as soon as she saw Mr. Murray's face, Miss Minton knew there was no hope. She would not even be allowed to look after Maya in the holidays. She was in complete disgrace. Miss Minton had spent the night with her sister and bought another corset because the good times were gone. She sat up very straight, and before Mr. Murray could begin, she opened her purse and took out 10 sovereigns. "This is Maya's money," she said. "We sold the things we'd collected on the journey, and since there were 4 of us, it seemed proper to divide everything we earned by 4. Mr. Murray looked at the heap of coins in surprise. "And I have, of course, kept a list of expenses. Anything I bought for Maya out of her allowance, I have written down here." Yes. Mr. Murray had no doubt about Miss Minton's honesty. It was her sanity he was not sure about. He cleared his throat. "I have to tell you that before this escapade, I was considering making you joint guardian with me of Maya. I'm getting old, and a woman would be able to help her with the problems she might soon meet. But now I'm afraid I shall have to dismiss you and arrange for Maya to spend her holidays at school." Miss Minton bowed her head. "Yes," she said. "I was expecting that." Mr. Murray pushed back his chair. "Miss Minton, what on earth made you let a young girl travel up the Amazon and spend weeks living with savages? What made you do it? The British consul thinks that you must all have been drugged." Perhaps we were drugged. Not by the things the Zanti smoked, none of us touched them, but by peace, by happiness, by a different sense of time. "I don't think you have explained why you let Maya..." Miss Minton interrupted him. "I will explain. At least I will try. You see, I have looked after some truly dreadful children in my time, and it was not easy to get fond of them. After all, a governess is not a mother. But Maya, well, I'm afraid I grew to love her. And that meant I began to think what I would do if she was my child." "And you would let her..." began Mr. Murray, but Miss Minton stopped him. "I would let her have adventures. I would let her choose her path. It would be hard. It was hard, but I would do it. Oh, not completely, of course. Some things have to go on. Cleaning one's teeth, arithmetic. But Maya fell in love with the Amazon. it happens. The place was for her and the people. Of course there was some danger, but there is danger everywhere. 2 years ago in this school, there was an outbreak of typhus and 3 girls died. Children are knocked down and killed by horses every week, here in these streets. She broke off, gathering her thoughts. When she was travelling and exploring and finding her songs, Maya wasn't just happy, she was herself. I think something broke in Maya when her parents died, and out there it was healed. Perhaps I'm mad, and the professor too, but I think children must lead big lives, if it's in them to do so, and it is in Maya. The old lawyer was silent, rolling his silver pen over and over between his fingers. You would take her back to Brazil? Yes. To live among savages? No. To explore and discover and look for giant sloths and new melodies and flowers that only blossom once every 20 years. Not to find them necessarily, but to look. She broke off, remembering what they had planned, the 4 of them, as they sailed the Aragapi, to build a proper house of rest near the Carter's old bungalow and live there in the rainy season, studying hard so that if Maya wanted to go to music college later, or Finn to train as a doctor, they would be prepared. And in the dry weather, to set off and explore. Mr. Murray had risen to his feet. He walked over to the window and stood with his back to her, looking out at the square. It's impossible. It's madness. There was a long pause. Or is it? The old man said. Maya had been sitting absolutely still on a chair in the hall, waiting. Now she heard a loud peal on the street bell and turned to see a dark, wild-haired boy running up the steps. Taking no notice of the flustered maid, he came up to Maya. I'm going home, Maya, shouted Finn. I'm going home. Upstairs, a door had opened and Miss Minton came slowly down the stairs, dabbing her eyes. Then she drew herself up to her full height. We are all going home, she said.